On the morning of the 18th of March, 1937, the superintendent of the richest rural school in America called a meeting to solve a mystery. For weeks, his students and his teachers had been getting headaches. Sharp ones in the middle of class, with no clear cause. He sat with his board that morning and tried to work out what was making the children sick. The answer was under his feet. It had been under his feet the whole time. Beneath the school, in a sealed space that ran the entire length of the building, natural gas had been leaking for weeks. It was invisible. It had no smell. And in a town built on oil, where the air already carried petroleum, no one thought twice about it. At 17 minutes past 3 that afternoon, a teacher flipped a switch. Nearly 300 students and teachers would not go home. This is the story of the New London school explosion, the deadliest school disaster in American history. It is the story of a building that was warning the people inside it, in the only way it could, and of a warning nobody was able to read. And it is the reason that the gas in your own home has a smell at all. New London was not supposed to be a place where children died. In 1937, it was one of the wealthiest school districts in the United States, and it had gotten that way almost overnight. 7 years earlier, a wildcatter had struck oil in the East Texas field, and the ground under Rusk County turned out to hold one of the largest pools of oil ever found in America. The money came in a flood. Where there had been farmland, there were now derricks to the horizon, and a tax base rich enough to build a school most cities would have envied. The London School was the pride of that boom. A modern building of steel and concrete, shaped like a great letter E, set on a gentle slope, filled with the sons and daughters of oil workers who had come from all over the country to work the field. More than 500 students, from the 5th grade to the 11th, sat in its classrooms. It was, by every measure that mattered to the people who built it, a safe and solid place. It sat above a hidden floor. When the building was going up, the school board had made a small change to save money. Instead of one central boiler, they installed dozens of individual gas heaters throughout the building, fed by a gas line that ran through a long, closed crawl space beneath the main floor. That crawl space ran the full length of the school. It was 250 feet long and almost completely sealed. At the time, no one thought of it as a danger. It was a way to keep the classrooms warm and the budget low. But every decision that would kill those children was already being made, quietly, by reasonable people trying to be careful with money. This is how it happened. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand the gas. When oil comes out of the ground, natural gas comes with it. In 1937, in the East Texas field, that gas was worthless. There was so much of it, and so little use for it, that the oil companies simply burned it off into the sky. It was called residue gas or green gas, and it was free for the taking. Homes, churches, and schools all over the oil field tapped into it to save money, and the companies, having no use for it themselves, looked the other way. In January of 1937, the London School did the same. Until then, it had bought its gas from a utility company at a cost of about $300 a month. To save that money, the district disconnected from the utility and ran a tap into the residue line of a nearby gasoline plant. The work was not done by licensed plumbers. It was done by men the school already employed, and looked over by a salesman. And the gas they were now piping into the building was different in one crucial way from the gas they had been buying. It had no smell. The utility gas was processed. The residue gas was raw. Its quality changed from hour to hour, and its pressure was erratic, and it carried no odor at all. It flowed into the long sealed crawl space beneath the school through a 2-inch line, feeding the heaters above. And somewhere along that line, at a connection no one would ever be able to examine, it began to leak. There was no way to see it. There was no way to smell it. But the building had begun, in its own way, to sound an alarm. In the weeks before the explosion, students and teachers started getting headaches. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough that people noticed. Children who felt fine at home felt ill at their desks. The cause seemed impossible to pin down. And in a town that smelled of oil and gas from every well for miles, the one clue that might have saved them, a strange odor in the halls, did not exist, because the gas that was poisoning them had no odor to give. By the middle of March, the complaints had reached the superintendent. And on the morning of the 18th, he and the board sat down to find out what was wrong with their school. They were looking in the right building. They were sitting almost directly above the answer. They simply had no way to know it. The 18th of March was a Thursday, and the school was in a good mood. The next day's classes had been cancelled so the students could travel to a competition in a neighboring town, and the afternoon had the loose, restless feeling of a day before a holiday. In the gymnasium, 100 feet from the main building, mothers were gathering for a meeting of the Parent-Teacher Association. The younger children had already been let out early. Most of them were on their buses or already home. Inside the main building, more than 500 students and around 40 teachers waited out the last minutes of the day. Beneath them, in the sealed crawlspace, the leaking gas had done what gas does in a closed room. It had filled the space, mixing with the air until it reached the exact proportion at which it will burn. Not too little to catch. Not too much to smother a flame. The building was now, from end to end, a bomb waiting for a spark. All it needed was one small source of ignition, anywhere along that 250-foot chamber. It came from the manual training room, where a teacher named Lemmy Butler was working with his students. He switched on an electric sanding machine. The switch was a simple one, the kind that throws a small spark as the contacts close, a spark no one would ever notice. That spark reached the gas. The explosion did not feel like a fire. It felt like the ground itself lifting. Witnesses outside saw the walls of the school bulge, and then the entire structure seemed to rise into the air before it came apart. The roof lifted off and crashed back down. The walls blew outward. A slab of concrete weighing 2 tons was thrown 200 feet and landed on a car. The blast was heard 4 miles away. Parents in the gymnasium felt the floor jump beneath them and ran out to see their school collapsing into a mountain of brick and steel. It was over in a moment. The building that had stood so solid and modern that morning was gone, and buried in it were nearly everyone who had been inside. The people who tried to explain it later would find that almost nothing about that afternoon had gone wrong in the ordinary sense. No one was drunk. No one was reckless. A teacher turned on a sander at the end of the school day. That was all it took, because the danger had been building silently beneath them for weeks, and no one had been able to see it. What happened next drew the whole country to a patch of East Texas mud. The oil field emptied itself onto the school grounds. Roughnecks who worked the derricks, men whose whole job was moving heavy things with their hands, came running from every rig in the field and began tearing at the wreckage with crowbars and their bare fingers. Mothers from the gymnasium clawed through brick, looking for their children. It rained that evening, and the work went on under floodlights strung from the oil rigs, through the mud and the cold all night. The numbers were almost beyond belief. Of the more than 500 students in the building, only about 130 walked away without serious injury. Nearly 300 students and teachers were dead. In a town of a few thousand people, Almost no family was untouched. Whole classrooms were gone. Parents lost 2 and 3 children in the same afternoon. The local furniture stores became morgues. Embalmers drove in from across the state, and still there were not enough coffins. Among the dead was the son of the school superintendent, the man who had approved the switch to the cheaper gas. He had spent that very morning trying to solve the mystery of the headaches. Now he had lost his own child to the thing he had been looking for. A 20-year-old reporter was sent to cover it, one of the first to reach the scene, and filed his dispatches through the night. His name was Walter Cronkite, and it was his first national story. Decades later, after covering the Second World War and the Nuremberg trials and a lifetime of news, he said that nothing in his life had prepared him for New London, and that no story since that awful day had ever equaled it. The governor of Texas declared martial law. He sent in the Rangers and the National Guard to keep order and manage the crowds, and he convened a military court of inquiry to find out how a modern school had turned, in an instant, into a grave for its own students. Experts came from the state and from the Federal Bureau of Mines. They drilled into the ground. They tested the sewers. They traced the gas line through what was left of the crawl space. And slowly they assembled the answer that the headaches had been trying to give all along. The investigators found what you already know. Gas had leaked from a faulty connection into the sealed crawl space and pooled there for weeks, until a spark set it off. The gas was odorless, the space was closed, and the leak was invisible. Every part of the disaster came back to a single fact. The people in that building had no way to know the air beneath them was turning to explosive. When it came to blame, the inquiry reached a conclusion that enraged the parents of New London. No one was held responsible. No law had been broken because there were almost no laws to break. Using free residue gas was common. Installing your own gas line was common. The board had done what dozens of other schools and churches in the oil field had done, and there was no statute that said they could not. More than 70 lawsuits were filed by grieving families. Almost everyone was dismissed for lack of evidence. Nearly 300 children and teachers were dead, and in the eyes of the law, it was nobody's fault. But if the courts gave the families nothing, the disaster forced a change that has quietly protected everyone who has lived since. Within weeks, the Texas legislature met and passed a law requiring that natural gas be given a smell. From then on, gas sold for use in buildings had to be mixed with a chemical, a compound called mercaptan, that stinks of rotten eggs. It is added in tiny amounts, just enough that the human nose can catch a leak long before it becomes dangerous. The idea spread from Texas across the country, and in time it became federal law. That sharp, sulfurous smell you notice when a stove fails to light, the smell that sends you to open a window, is not the smell of natural gas at all. Natural gas has no smell. That warning was added on purpose, by people who had learned in the hardest way possible what happens when a deadly gas gives no sign of itself. The disaster changed one more thing. The men who had installed that gas line were not qualified to do it, and so Texas passed a law requiring engineers to be licensed by the state, the first of its kind, a law that spread to the rest of the country and still governs the profession today. One of the people who spoke to the legislature about school safety was a 9-year-old girl who had survived the blast. A cenotaph of pink Texas granite stands today in New London, across from the school that was rebuilt on almost the same ground. Nearly 300 names are carved into it. Most of them were children, in the richest little school in America, killed by a danger no one could see or smell. It is why your gas has a smell. You have caught that smell 100 times without a thought. It is there because of a school in Texas and the nearly 300 people who died, proving that a warning you cannot sense is no warning at all. Thank you for watching.